I want to thank you for taking time out on this Saturday to join us for a Let's Talk About It discussion about how to have an inclusive environment in our early childhood settings. I'm going to take a moment to say that Black Lives Matter. I want to take a moment to say that we can say our loved ones' names who have been affected by this. You may need to say your own name. And ultimately, the reason why we're getting together is for the young Black boys that we work with in early childhood education, as far as the girls too. Everybody matters. I'm going to ask that we take a moment of silence so we can breathe together and move forward. I'll pause my mic so we can just take a moment. Thank you. I want to start by saying this is a discussion that we're having so we can all come together and try to heal ourselves and each other and the children in our care. This is the discussion. Everybody has different perspectives, life experiences, and views. And we want to take that in account when talking. If you're listening to us, digest it, listen, and let's all learn and communicate with each other. I'm going to introduce our panel. Thank you for coming, everyone. How are you? Good. I first want to reintroduce Kevin Hubbard first, because most of us are familiar with Kevin Hubbard, who meets with us, and he does our wellness sessions with our teachers who are in our CDA program to help us get through this trying and tribulized time. Kevin, you want to say hi to everybody for a minute?
Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to have a conversation on today. I'm really excited about the topic, and yeah, just glad to be here.
Thank you. As you may know, Kevin's background is in psychology from Temple University. He works in practice with the LaPole Group in Philadelphia, and he has worked with children, adolescents, and adults in the African American community for the last 12 years. He has an understanding of the challenges that we face working in early childhood education. Next, I want to introduce retired Officer Toni Palmer. Good morning, retired Officer Toni Palmer. How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm good. Toni Palmer entered the police academy in December of 1988, spent most of her career in the 4th Police District. In 2006, was detailed to the Forensic Science Unit until her retirement in July in 2009. And then she served in the Philadelphia Police Department, receiving citation and honorable service. And after retirement with the Philadelphia Police, she started a new career with Temple Police Department as a certified dispatch team unit leader until that retirement. And now she's a special education behavioral room assistant with the School District of Philadelphia. I'm mindful. We are very excited to have her here.
Hi guys, nice to meet everyone. And thank you, Dionne, for inviting me. And I'm sure I may have some input, but I'm sure that I will learn a lot from you guys also. Thank you.
That's what we're here for. Thank you so much. And next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Kim. I don't want to butcher your last name.
That's fine. It's Heuschkel. It sounds nothing like it's spelled.
Yes. How are you this morning?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking.
Okay, of course. I wanted to say thank you so much because I know you really on vacation and you still joining us. So thank you again. Dr. Kimberly is Assistant Professor in Early Childhood Education, Pre-K to 4th, in the School of Education at Holy Family University in Philadelphia, PA, of course. She teaches courses in child development and learning, educational psychology, early childhood elementary theories and practices, and is the program coordinator for the undergrad early childhood program, pre-K to 4th. Kim has worked from K to 8th teacher in the school district as teaching specialists and supervisors in the New Jersey public school system. Her recent interest is in mental health, which we all need right now, social justice, and theories of whiteness as they operate and inform the disclosure of practices of teachers and schools. So I think we have a great panelist here to have a discussion.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I'm not really on vacation yet. We're still packing the car. So,
okay,
you know, we're in the preliminary stages, hence why my background, and I did disclose to everyone else, this is not a real background. I Googled Zoom backgrounds with books, and this is what my ideal house looks like.
I knew that wasn't a real because I knew you're supposed to be on vacation. That's why I said that. So I just want to say that we have 4 questions that have been selected from teachers and directors that work with us at the library in the early literacy spaces program. And that we are going to address the 4 questions that were the main priority on the minds of our teachers and directors. So let's hop right into it. Our first question is, why should we talk about race when we're talking to children? And I think I'm going to ask Kevin to open this up first because our panelists know that you've worked with us in the past and you can address our teachers about what they should be doing.
Thanks for calling on me. I guess I'll come at that question a little bit from, you know, some of my own experiences. I think that in order to have the conversation about race with children, I think that the adults have to have the conversation first and have a dialogue in order to be able to provide, you know, something of substance to children to be able to talk through, you know, this race thing. One of the things that I think about is, you know, when people say, you know, I'm colorblind, I don't see color. And I was like, well, what's the point of teaching young children about colors and numbers and shapes and things of that nature? You know, the world has so much to offer. I think that just being able to have the conversation first amongst ourselves, having a real deep and meaningful understanding of race and in the classroom setting, and then trying to find ways to not only just have what we call in ECE inclusive practices, but to truly have truly inclusive practices, because I think it's a fallacy to say that, you know, we have inclusive practices when we sometimes don't practice what we preach. So I think that having the dialogue first amongst ourselves before we have a conversation with our children to talk about, you know, defining, you know, different skin colors and people are different and everyone is our, you know, our friend, and, you know, teaching kids from that childlike perspective as opposed to feeling like, you know, we have to have these deep, you know, conversations with children. We need to have those conversations amongst ourselves before we jump in and try to teach something so complex, if that makes sense. Can't hear you, Dionne.
Okay, thank you so much, Kevin. And then I'm going to go to Kim. It's okay, I'll call you Kim. We call each other by first name. I just want to make sure everybody knows. Can you talk about the perspective of why we should teach children about race? Because a lot of people feel like children are too young, especially the children we work with in early childhood education. So can you elaborate on that?
Well, I was reading through some of the resources that you and Stephanie had sent me, and one of the articles I really liked was the "Are Your Kids Too Young to Talk About Race?" And it was an infographic talking about, you know, are your kids too young? And from birth, at 3 months old, we begin to see children differentiating based on skin color. And so I think we need to ask ourselves, are we too old to talk about race? And the answer is obviously no. So why would you be too young to talk about race? And I want to play off what Kevin said too, is that, you know, our whole push right now, which is really meaningful, is this idea of having culturally relevant or culturally responsive classrooms, right? So that really focuses on who's sitting in front of you and what their life experiences are. So I don't think it needs to be a drop-in curriculum, a one-size-fits-all conversation. It needs to be in response to what the students in your classroom are experiencing, in what your families are considering in their lives and their world experiences. One of my favorite books is Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria by Beverly Daniel Tatum. And as a white woman reading that for the first time, it really gave me pause because I'd never been asked to consider my identity development because whiteness sort of reified my experience and didn't really ask me to consider who I was racially. And it really gave me pause because it began that journey for me thinking about people of color and white people and how we develop our identities. And with children in our childcare settings and even parents in our childcare settings, they might never have been asked to consider how they developed who they are and how really flexible our identities need to be. It's not that I was 2 years old and I decided this is exactly who I am for the rest of my life. I'm obviously going to be a princess who rides a unicorn down the street, and you know, I live in a glass house on the beach, maybe floating on an island made of candy canes. Like, obviously our perspectives change, our identity development changes based on our relationships, based on our geographic location, based on current events. And I think we need to give families and students and professionals in our settings the chance to explain and talk about how they define themselves and who they are. And I think that's a big push in terms of why we need to talk to kids about race, is because it's there. It's a social construct. We created it as a society. And so if we created it, why can't we now all of a sudden talk about it? And I think, as Toni brought up in the beginning, Toni, I think you have a lot to add to the conversation, because I think we all have a lot to add to the conversation, because we've all had experiences, and racism and race is out there. Beverly Daniel Tatum, not to over-reference her, but she gives the example of if you're living in a polluted society or a polluted area, you are a smog breather, and you really can't avoid breathing in pollutants from the air because it's just all around you. It's just where you live. And I think race and racism are very similar, as she said, that we breathe it in. It's part of our media. It's part of the way we interact. It's part of your classroom library selections. It's part of the conversations you think you're having in the hallway that are quiet, but maybe the kids are actually hearing you anyway. And so I think I would often ask why it's not important for us to talk about it. If we talk about everything else, why not this?
And Toni, can you tell me from your experience as a police officer and working with the community, why you think it's important that we talk about this? Because you spend a lot of times, and I know I probably didn't say this, your bio can be as long as my arm, but I tried to shorten it. You spend a lot of time in the Philadelphia police, in the Philadelphia school districts working with the children, more so as a community liaison, not to be there as security or policing. So, you know, can you speak about that?
Sure. First of all, our children, they look at us. They look at us and they want to see how to become an adult. They see how we act towards each other as adults. They see how other children treat their peers. I think we as adults, teachers, and so forth, we have to first of all discuss it with our children, because if we don't discuss it with our children, they will get it from their peers. They will make up their own minds as to how they should treat someone, how people should be treated, from what they see or hear from other people. It's very important that we as adults give kids accurate information, information that when they're confronted with a stereotype, that they can draw their own understanding and conclusion. So that's basically how I feel about it.
Mm-hmm.
So we have
Toni,
to
can I jump in real quick? I think that's so important. One of the videos that Stephanie sent me, Alex Mint, it's just a minute and a half video, and he talks about talking to his own children who are multiracial, and how he basically armed them with those pre-conversations. And his daughter was confronted with someone who was questioning the race of her mother. And she turned around and said, "I am multiracial, get over it." And he's like, you know, that's just a conversation. You're arming them with this language and these conversations. So I totally agree. I think that it needs to be out there. Thanks for sharing that.
Yes, thank you. If there's any other comments on question 1, I'm going to move to question 2. What should we do as educators to prepare ourselves for these conversations, and how should we discuss race with children? I think on this one, I'll start with Kim.
Thanks. So I did a little bit of digging because I didn't want to I teach college courses in early childhood for our pre-service teachers. And a lot of times we have a lot of questions amongst our teachers about what's the difference between multicultural education, social justice education, culturally responsive or culturally relevant teaching, what's anti-bias. And so a lot of these words get thrown around. And I think it's our job as educators to inform ourselves first about what the differences are. And I found this great graphic by a woman named Zaretta Hammond, and she wrote an entire book in terms of how we really talk about these distinctions in equity. And when I was growing up, most of my approaches that I was taught with were multicultural ed. And that's really just social justice and harmony. Zaretta talks about the idea that we focused on celebrating diversity. And then as we move to that more socially responsive teaching or social justice education, we focus more on developing a critical consciousness. And so in college classes, a lot of times I focus a lot on this, on anti-racist efforts, on exposing social and political forces that are at work behind the scenes of that sort of hidden racism that's involved and the privilege that we have in our normal and daily actions. But I think in early childhood, what we need to focus on is that culturally responsive or culturally relevant teaching. Because I think the focus of that is to accelerate learning efforts in the classroom. And so as teachers, the idea that we need to embrace the capacity of our diverse students, diverse racially, diverse linguistically, diverse sexually, diverse gender identity-wise, religiously, and think about how can we educate them so that they have the agency and they have the skills and strategies to go out into the world and really make a difference. And so I always go back to NACCE because that's the National Association for the Education of Young Children. And so what can we do as educators to prepare ourselves for those big conversations where we're focusing on cultural relevance is that I first, and this is a list from a NACCE article by Kirsten Cole and Deandra Verwain from 2018. But one of the things they mentioned is that you need to find a knowledgeable peer that you can have these conversations with, right? So having it with ourselves is great, but finding a coalition of teachers, whether it be online or in person, that can talk about these issues. If something comes up with a parent or a student, how can we begin to prepare ourselves for those bigger conversations? Again, like Kevin said, if we can't have them amongst ourselves. This is also the article, Stephanie, that you put online, the resource, the upending, becoming upended, the teaching and learning about race and racism with young children. And I think the recollection and the reflection that we do as individuals about times when we have experienced bias and we have experienced privilege is an important part of that. I often role play with our college students about what kind of misconceptions students and families are coming into the classroom with. So what can I anticipate and how can I anticipate them responding so that I'm prepared for a variety of scenarios? And one of the last things that really resonated with me is that acknowledge that we are all on a journey of growth. And that was directly from the article, is the idea that we as teachers are scaffolding these conversations, right? We don't need to be the beacon of all knowledge about race and racism and current events. It's okay to say, I don't know. I'd like to find out more about that. Or that's a really, and we're great as teachers about turning it around and saying, that's a great question. I wonder how we can find out more about that. And then work them through and work parents through those steps, because we're the professionals, right? Most of us get paid to do these kinds of jobs. And so it's up to us to model those behaviors, as hard as it is, and model that sort of humility, because your stance of openness will be embraced by your students and your community. And so I think it's up to us to do the work first, and then express that and articulate that to our communities and our students.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to ask Toni now, when you were in the police force, I mean, one of the main things you did was de-escalate a lot of situations. So from your perspective on there, when it came, and a lot, especially when it came to children and having, I guess, arguments and discussions, or even on the streets with the children, what were some techniques, or how do you feel about why this is important?
Okay, my opinion, why this is important, because our children, for example, they see, let's say by the looting and the protests and all of that, they see this on TV, they may see this in their neighborhoods, and we as adults, we need to sit down and have a conversation, or if we're there with them, pull them aside and say, listen, this is not the right way to do this. You know, what we're doing is we're showing our anger. We need to try to understand what's going on, try to find a peaceful way of selling this, like talking and discussing things like that nature. You should also try to, I guess, show them, you know, how we are acting. You know, if we act a certain way, we're acting peacefully, we're talking to one another, we're discussing our feelings, not arguing and fighting and all of that. When they see that, okay, maybe there's another way of doing this. I know a lot of times when I was at the schools, like after school, there would be a fight or something, you know, over something that's really nothing. When you pull a child aside and you ask them, what is this about? Sometimes they have to stand there and think about it. It could be something as simple as someone's taking a peach from them in the lunchroom. And then they're going to call their brothers and sisters and their aunts and uncles, and they're going to meet up at the school and all. And then when you take them aside and actually talk to them, and then you tell them, listen, was this really worth all of this? Now, I know I never wanted to lock up a child. In my opinion, I think talking to that child, giving this child resources on how to handle situations is really the best way, not always locking up a child. Mm-hmm. And I took a lot of time when I was in the school and sitting down talking with this child, whether it be male, female, and they actually appreciated it. Once they sat down and talked to you and they understood where you were coming from, and then they had a better understanding of how to handle a situation. Mm-hmm. So it all comes from us.
Yes, I agree. You were basically supporting social emotional, you know, tactics for children to self-regulate themselves. And I think that is so important for our police force in the city to do when it comes to interacting with children. Kevin, do you want to add any comments from your perspective?
Absolutely. I want to actually piggyback on what Kim said earlier. She said, you know, we have to, you know, kind of inform ourselves. And one of the things that kind of popped into my head as she was speaking was like this idea that the way that we do history, even now in schools, it almost has to be completely revamped. I feel like, you know, we're doing a disservice to our children when we don't teach them the full breadth of, you know, what our country was founded on, and kind of like, you see, you know, all around the country now, the Confederate monuments being, you know, pulled down and vandalized. But I guess in order to prepare for the conversation, which is the question, like my mind went to dealing with the racial trauma. I feel like that, you know, trauma is something that we all, you know, have either experienced in some way, shape, or form, whether it be direct or vicarious. And I think that for a lot of time and generations, that transgenerational trauma has kind of trickled down into, the current generation. And I think that, in order for us to really do that deep work, sometimes that might require us to really, participate in therapy, talk about these things in context, and not be afraid. I think there's just like this deep fear of talking about it. And I think that, as much as we, talk about race in the therapeutic setting, it's not in the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for, diagnosing mental health disorders. But from my perspective personally, I feel like racism is a mental health disorder. And if we frame it that way, I think that we can begin to find ways to infuse, supportive treatments, supportive conversations, supportive settings, so that people can really, have realistic, meaningful dialogue about this. So that's just one way I think we should prepare. And then I know, Toni mentioned anger, and that popped another thought into my head, which was, we when we're going through something, it doesn't necessarily have to be, caused by a situation or something of that nature. It's more or less like when we have that trauma response, I'll say, it's like you go into what's called like fight or flight, right? And I think that when you see the protests, when you see all of the aggression and anger on TV, that is trauma, you know what I mean? But that's just pent up trauma, spilling out. So I think that, when we're looking at our kids and when we're trying to really, be supportive of them, really just having the conversation. But I think also what's really important is acknowledging their questions, because I think that kids, they don't know what they don't know. So it's like you're having a conversation and they're like, what are you talking about? But I think that, acknowledging their questions, kind of asking them if they have questions, getting them to participate, so that it doesn't feel like I'm trying to, teach per se how to be a anti-racist, but to kind of like have those supportive conversations so they can form their opinions, they can form judgments, they can make those, neural connections, increase their social emotional development, and feel like they have a say in how they feel about these things.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of guidance, of course, but just making sure we don't discount trauma in the context of what we're dealing with.
Right. Thank you so much. I'll move on to question 3, and I'm going to start with Toni. You touched on it earlier a little bit, but how to talk to children about the social unrest and the current events. We spoke about what you're seeing on TV with the police and the rioting and also the marching for the protests. So can you talk about that?
Okay, first of all, what I got out of that, what we show on TV, the videos and everything of, let's say, the officer kneeling on Mr. Floyd's neck, something negative, other officers maybe spraying mace or choking someone. Show the children that officers are also kneeling beside us. They're out there doing something as simple as playing basketball with our kids. Show them that there's a positive to this. That is not that all people aren't negative. All police officers aren't mean. They aren't this and that. What they hear from their parents and their peers and all that. You really need to show the kids that there are officers out here who are there to help them, who are there when they need them, if they need to talk to them. They just have to be shown a different view of what our officers are out there doing, not just the negative views.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. I am going to ask Kevin now, because a lot of this had to do with their mental health. They're listening to what the TV is saying, and like you said, frustration for what maybe family and friends and neighbors may be discussing. Can you talk about that, please?
Sure. You know, when I think of like how to have the conversation, I know I kind of alluded to like the classroom setting, but I think, you know, really it starts at home. Okay. I think we should go back to where, you know, where are kids coming from? What are the environments that they're living in? And try to really figure out like what are the supports, you know, on a community level, you know, that some of our families need. One of the things, you know, working at ECE that I constantly ran into was just you know, I would be working with a family, or I'd be, you know, doing early intervention with a kid, and I would, you know, I would almost feel like my hands were tied in a lot of ways. I'd be scurrying here and scurrying there for resources, and really just trying to find those things, you know, to support the child. But you know, it was hard work, but it was doable. But I think that accessibility to supports and services are important. Um, and then, you know, as far as like having the conversations, I think that parents, you know, should be participants in these conversations. Even this right now here, what we're doing, you know, like parents can be a part of these conversations and, you know, have that confidence and that competence to feel as though they can talk to their children. You can have these conversations. They may be difficult, they may be hard, they may be awkward, they may be, you know, off-putting, but I think the greatest crime that we could commit is not talking about it. You know, the greatest crime that we can commit is, you know, remaining, you know, silent. But I think that the silence, it actually speaks volumes. Um, that was, you know, one of the things I was thinking about as I was watching something about John Lewis. You know, he said we have a moral obligation. You know, we have a moral obligation to do something, and if part of that obligation means, hey, I got to have these conversations with my kid. They're not the most comfortable conversations. Sometimes they're a little confusing. Sometimes they may be a little bit, you know, upsetting. But being able to do the work first and foremost to move towards the conversation, I think is definitely needed. Of course, you know, we have to get on social justice. Of course, we have to get on racial justice. Of course, we have to talk about, you know, criminal justice reform. But I think that ultimately, um, you know, when we're calling ourselves, you know, anti-racist, or when we're, you know, going out and we're protesting and we're doing that legwork, I think that is important. Is an important component. It's one strategy of many to begin to start this process of having meaningful conversations with our kids. And, you know, yes, there are issues of social unrest, and yes, there are issues of violence and things of that nature. But we also need to help our kids understand, like, you know, we are doing something that is, you know, positive. This is, you know, all the racial, you know, riots and things like, you know, I think MLK said it. He said, you know, a riot is the language of the unheard. You know, we have to understand that the riots weren't, you know, just some random, you know, outpouring of just randomness. It was more about, you know, this is upsetting. This, like, enough is enough. You know, people were upset. People, you know, I went out the first night of the riots. I'm being completely honest. I didn't do anything. I didn't touch anything, but I went out. And what I did was I was actually, and randomly enough, I was watching it on television, and I get a phone call from my brother, and he says, "Hey, we gotta go downtown and pick up my wife from Penn, because she's stuck at work, and she said they shut down SEPTA." And I'm like, okay, so I guess we got to take that ride. So we go downtown, and I'm seeing, you know, people are, you know, kicking over trash cans, stuff's on fire, you know, people are going the wrong way up one-way streets, and I'm like, this is a byproduct of us not having the conversation. This is really, and I said that to my brother, and he just like, yeah, you're right. I think this is like, we need to have more talks about this. So I think we have to get past our ego, we have to get past our fear, and we have to go into these conversations with our kids. Start at home, and then let's extrapolate it out into other areas of our lives.
Yes, thank you so much. Now I'm going to ask him, from your perspective, more so as working in early childhood education and as a teacher, things that can help our teachers, and I'm putting myself in that clump too, because I work with the teachers, to talk about these hard things. Because myself, and I know a couple other specialists that I work with, we're having Zoom meetings with our kids in the morning circle. And when all this was going on, it was so hard and difficult to have a 3 and 4-year-old come to you and say that they're rioting and protesting because they don't like me because I'm Black, and that's not what we want them to do. And that was a hard pill to swallow, and tell him, how do we respond to the questions and the conversations that young children are just having with each other, and just out of curiosity of what they're asking us as educators.
I so appreciate that question. I think one of the hardest things is being an early childhood teacher, and it's on the fly, getting questions that you're not sure yourself what the answer would be, let alone how to interpret it through a child's lens. And I want to go back to something Kevin said, because I want to hear more about Kevin's perspective on this, but that idea of like trauma-informed teaching in early childhood, and the idea that so many of our parents and families and educators are trying to do this hard work, Dionne, about giving children answers, making them feel safe, comforting them, informing them, while they themselves have experienced trauma in their lives. And so through their lens of trauma, they're trying to address the potential trauma that the children in their settings are experiencing. So the first thing I would say is the conversation needs to happen earlier, right? So prior to those questions being asked, it's kind of a red flag of, we should have had this conversation before the protests happened. We should have had this conversation before the riots. I know one of the questions that you gave us was, what's the difference between a march and a parade? Right? So what a great question that a kid would answer. And if I don't know the answer, I can just say, well, what do you think the difference is? Right? Just see where they're coming from, see what their perspective is, and then try to, again, as Kevin said, we get a lot of misinformation from our textbooks, from the history that we're taught. And so if we inform ourselves, we can then inform them as to, well, that's not exactly 100% true. Let's talk about what that looks like. So let's brainstorm words about we think of when we think parade. Okay, great. So what are some words that we think of when we think march or protest? And what are the differences between those? And we can actually learn a lot with our students. Not saying we shouldn't be experts, but we can use developmentally appropriate approaches in our classrooms to address these kind of conversations. And it's okay to say, I'm not sure, can you give me a little bit and I will look it up and I'm going to get back to you. Or, you know what, I want to talk to your parents a little bit more about that before I give you an answer. We all have phones. Hopefully, we all have a way to get in touch with parents, whether it be via email, via knock on the door because you live down the street in your community, whether it be a cell phone or a mobile phone. But I think Toni was saying in her prior answers that that face-to-face conversation is a gift that we can give each other. Because I know myself, I write emails sometimes and I have to sit on them and think, how is this going to be interpreted? And there's so many ways to interpret a text message. Please, if someone puts a period at the end of a sentence in a text message, I feel a little offended. Like, why are you putting a period? Why not a dot, dot, dot? Like, I don't think there's enough exclamation points. Maybe you should have put an emoji in there. And so as teachers, it's our professional responsibility to think beyond just having a conversation with a friend, right? Our communities, unfortunately and fortunately, are looking to us now to help them through this. And so we have to step up to the plate. The last thing I wanted to acknowledge is that sort of the children in trauma, the link that we're finding now in terms of this sort of generational trauma that might be happening in a lot of our, is happening in so many of our settings. And it's so interesting to think about how early childhood educators see things through such a different lens a lot of times than parents. I'm a parent myself, or as community members, and that the behaviors that children are exhibiting at this point might not be directly related to what they're seeing on TV or what they're seeing in their families or what they're experiencing is in a referred trauma sort of way. But their acting out is the way they're processing the information and misinformation that they're getting, their avoidance of going to school, their lack of handing in work, their withdrawal from community conversations, or they're over, all of a sudden the child who hasn't spoken is now the class clown. That's a way of them building strategies to help them process what they're hearing in an absence of us talking to them about it. And so I think as early childhood educators, the ways we can talk to our children and our families is that we can recognize those signs, right? So the article, The Race and Trauma in the Classroom, that you guys provided for the teachers and the professionals, talks about the difference between avoiding a path to school that would take them through an area of significant gun violence or that had gun violence in the past, and avoiding school altogether because it reminds them or it triggers in them a response to gun violence. Well, both of those are strategies that ensure safety, but one is a way to build resiliency and coping strategies in a way that we can talk about how to keep ourselves safe. And the other one is a misinterpretation of what that is, but they're children. I mean, really, we have to think they've only been on this earth for a limited amount of time. I mean, some of them can't even feed themselves. They shouldn't be feeding themselves, but, and we're talking to them about social justice reform. So I think we need to be developmentally appropriate. I think we have to acknowledge that we don't know all the answers and that we can learn with our families. We can learn with the children. We can be available. And I think that's a huge part of that conversation. So I really appreciate, and Kevin, any information you have on trauma and how to deal with those kinds of conversations with families in the classroom, I think would be much appreciated, because a lot of people are trying to work through their own issues while they're trying to work through this with other families.
I did want to comment on that too, like just in terms of the trauma-informed care. You know, most of my work that was done with the family, like the parents. It was, you know, the kid almost was like just the byproduct of the family. It was like we had to do much more legwork supporting the family, and sometimes it was just really just basic need stuff. I felt more like a social worker, you know, more often, you know, at work when I was trying to work with the children, but it was more so, you know, a need within those families, in those communities. One of the things that, you know, we hear about and we see is, you know, the kids who have, you know, severe behavioral or social emotional dysregularities. And, you know, it shouldn't be a surprise to us, you know, if a kid has, you know, hunger and food insecurities, if, you know, they're cold all night because their home doesn't have heat, or, you know, their house doesn't have air conditioning, or they're hearing, you know, arguments and yelling all night. Like, these things should not be a surprise. And I think that being able to understand that link and seeing like what an environment can do to a person, and then putting them into another environment where, you know, that safety may not feel assured. We see those dysregularities and we see the dysregulated behavior, and it may look very scary and off-putting, but it's like I've seen what that looks like, and I know that the kids, like, we can't blame them. You know, we have to look at them and say, like, this is something that has to be worked on in totality. And I think that if we hit it from all angles and all approaches, yes, we can absolutely, you know, get into better spaces and better places to have these other kinds of conversations about race and racial injustice.
Yes, so true. I want to ask Toni, because she's in a special education classroom with the children at the school district, and though the children are in the mainly first, second, and third grade, their cognitive level are basically like our early childhood education, you know, children. So we don't want to leave them out. We have to think about them, our children who may need special services, and think about how they are digesting everything. So if she could talk about how do we do that? How we think about them? We can't leave them out.
Hey, Dionne, I'm glad you asked that question, because I was going to chime in. Our kids, people don't think that our special needs children, like, they see what's going on. They don't think that they see what's going on. If they don't see what's going on television, on YouTube, because they're in the YouTube, they watch TV, they see what's happening outside of their houses. They definitely know what's going on. They have questions about it. If they're acting out or they're feeling sad or not talking, it's because of what's going on. They don't understand it, and they want answers. And I think that we have to somehow figure out a way to give them those answers. That's something that they can accept and understand. Because believe me, I know they definitely see it all. It affects them. Um, they look for us for answers, and it's just a matter of how do we give them answers. That's the question. And I would definitely love some help as far as how to give my kids answers.
And Toni, can I chime in for 1 sec? I think that's such I just think that's such an essential point to make, is that they're exhibiting behaviors that are showing how they're processing this. And I think another thing that we as educators can bring to that lens is that, unfortunately, in our society, we have labeled Black and brown, especially young men, as having those behaviors and attributing them to things other than their processing of trauma, other than their misunderstandings about situations. It's something that is just inherent in their racial identity. And that's so untrue, that all children process difficult situations in their own unique way. And it's not because of their racial identity. It's not because of their linguistic learnings. It's not because of their, it might be part of how they're processing it, but it's not because of that. And I think we need to be so cautious of that as educators, as saying, the phrase, boys will be boys. Well, that's such a harmful thing to think about as a teacher, because that kind of excuses a lot of behaviors that might be signals to us, like Toni, you were saying, might be signals to us that they need help. And I think we also, owe it to ourselves to have those conversations in the teachers' rooms and in the Zoom lounges, and challenging each other and saying, did you ever think about it might be because you're seeing that student with a disability in a certain way, and you're just saying that behavior is acceptable, or that behavior is unacceptable because of who they are racially or culturally. And I think those bigger conversations, we can facilitate those amongst each other. I don't think those really need to be part of our early childhood conversations with students, but I think that's a way that we can prepare ourselves, like Kevin was saying, in saying that we have our own biases and our own implicit prejudices that we need to unpack before we do the good work that we all need to do.
Yes, that is so true. Kevin, was you going to chime in?
I was thinking again. No, I'm definitely thinking, like, yes, in order to kind of move into those conversations, as Kim said, we have to think about, our unconscious biases. Those are so dangerous. And I know that, in trying to talk about our unconscious bias, some people may assume that, of course, I'm not biased, but it's not a thing that is necessarily taught. It's nowadays like a reflex. If I see that person that looks suspicious and they are Black and they're wearing a hoodie, I feel the need, I need to cross the street or clutch my purse or whatever the case may be. One of the things that I heard a doctor use, I was at a conference once, and they talked about something called the 3Bs. And as disturbing as what I found the 3Bs to be, it kind of rang true. And the 3Bs, in their opinion, was big, Black, and bad. There was like this triad of association that, when a child is, let's say, 4 years old and they happen to be Black and they're, maybe a little bigger or heftier than for their age, that they're automatically bad. And having that kind of straight line of association was just really scary to see. And then even in classroom experiments, they had children sit and, ask teachers, ECE teachers, hey, which one of these kids has a problem behavior? Now, mind you, there's 3 children sitting at a table, 2 white, 1 Black, and they always, 9 times out of 10, were pointing out, the African-American child. And it was disturbing because those implicit bias, they're so deep-seated and they're so underneath of, our conscious efforts to kind of control and to think things through, but sometimes we're not conscious of it. And again, doing that work, therapeutically, and really just sitting with ourselves and reflecting, like, how do I think? How do I make decisions? How do I make judgments, or how do I pass judgment? That has to happen. It has to get past this idea of unconscious bias.
Mhm. Thank you so much. This is really good. I'm so glad that we're doing this. We're going to move on. We have about 10 minutes left to our last question um, that we have to discuss. And it is, how do we prepare our parents about the conversations that we're going to have in our classroom that we need to have? And it's outside of our curriculum, about everything that we've been talking in the previous questions as far as protests and racism, et cetera, like that. And I'm going to ask Kim to start that off, but I'm also going to say something that me and the specialist was talking about in our meeting when we're trying to get this together, is that I know I would write a letter to my parents and let them know that we're going to have this discussion. And I think Kim and Toni talked about that too, bring the parents in. Because we have to get their perspective. They're their children and we are teaching them, but let them know the scenarios on that. So Kim, take it away.
I mean, I always think I used to teach in elementary school, and one of the things that would often come up is issues of where babies come from, right? So that's like one of the most popular early childhood conversations that you're just like, oh, we're going to talk about this right now. And one of the techniques that I always tried to use was that I would always, try to contact the parents afterwards and just give them a heads up. This conversation is coming home tonight. And so you might want to Google or ask me any questions about how you can talk about this with your kids. Let's talk about this. And say to them, I was unprepared. I just wanted to talk to you about how we talked about it in class and how you might want to talk to them about it at home. Do you have any perspectives on that? Make it a conversation, like Toni was saying. Make it a dialogue. Don't make it a lecture.
Right.
Don't
Yes.
make it, I'm the sage on the stage. Let me tell you what you should tell your kid. Well, they're all coming from their own family and cultural perspectives. I've had parents, break down and confess things to me that are going on in their homes that I didn't even know about because I opened that conversation. And so that's for the more casual conversations, right? So that's when you get a Zoom call and you get a question and the parents hadn't been listening. You want to include them in that conversation. As Kevin was saying, we got to do that work, right? We need to unpack that and make resources available. But if you're planning on doing something with the whole class, I think number one, that falls clearly in line with developmentally appropriate practice. So I think it is absolutely important that we include that if we're going to create a caring community of learners, if we're going to make parents and families active participants in our classrooms. But a lot of times you want to inform them as much as you're informing the students. I know that as a parent, a lot of resources get sent home. I like to pretend I know it all because it just feels really good to just walk around my house by myself, just pretending I know everything. But I click on those links that his teachers send and I'm like, what is that about? Let me learn about that so that I can be more prepared. So sometimes we can send those resources home. And I love the resources you sent out to the teachers on this call because they were short, right? They gave references to larger sites, but they were quick snippets, right? They were easy to digest. They were a way to find more information. And the last thing I would say for parents is books, more books and books, and more books. Books that represent the students in your classroom and the students outside your classroom, that your family structure and other family structures, ones that are going to be a little bit boring possibly and a little bit exciting. I think there are a lot more resources now than there were when I was growing up and even when I was teaching because of this whole virtual world that we live in. I know LeVar Burton, who I love, in a lot of spheres, from Reading Rainbow all the way through to Star Trek and beyond. He partnered, so good. There's a lot to talk about there, but he created a Reading Rainbow app. It's called Skybrary, and you can subscribe to a subscription, and it's online books. You can do it on iPad or computer, and they are providing grants to schools that need these sorts of resources, and the books change over, and they're not the books where somebody else wrote them specifically for that app. They're real books, National Geographics. They're the history of a president. They're interesting fairy tales. They're Martin Luther King Jr. tales, and they're real literature. And the app lets the children either have it read to them and they can read along with it. You can do it silently. It's got a little bit of fancy graphics. And it's really such an ownership that the children own these kinds of materials and can choose on their own what they want to read. And the greatest part is parents can then track, and teachers can track what the children are choosing. And I know there are grants available, and I encourage people to reach out to me, and we've been talking, Stephanie and Dionne and I, about where to get funding for these kinds of things. Reach out to your higher education sites, reach out to your communities and companies locally to try and get funding, because it doesn't cost a lot, but families can access the same resources we as teachers do. It just takes a little creativity.
Yes, thank you. You know, I'm all chimed in when you said books, because that's what
Books.
In our program. We have a list of books that our director helped us compile, and we're getting them out to the centers so we can support our teachers and our parents as well with guiding these conversations.
And Dionne, I want to say I love the book list because it didn't have the book like how to talk about race for kids. Like it was actual contextual books. Not that book's not so important,
right?
But for a 2-year-old, that's not really jazzing them up, right? They want the funny, they want the Elephant and Piggy. So you really do have to pick developmentally appropriate books for kids, not just the textbook example. So I love the resource list. Thanks for providing that.
Yes, yes. I'm so glad that we did do that. So getting back to our questions about how we have these conversations and how do we bring the parents, I'm going to ask Toni, because you do so much de-escalating, not just as when you were in the police force, but now as in the school district. And a lot of that de-escalating, you're doing it with the parents, you know, so help us out. What do we do? How do we do that?
Yeah, I don't quite understand the question. How do we, as far as the parents?
Yes, how do we, you know, have this conversation with them about, you know, bring them in about having these topics? You know, yeah.
I think first and foremost, we have to get a communication going on with each parent. Believe it or not all parents will agree to it. Okay? They will say, no, it's not something that I think my child should know about, that, you know, X, Y, and Z. But not all parents are full that way. If we just put it out there to them, like send them, like Kim would say, like send them a letter or an email or even a phone call or a text and say, listen, this is what's going on right now. And you actually know what's going on in the city, in this world. I would like to have a conversation with you and your child in reference to this. Now, me personally, I think like before school starts, or even if school doesn't start and it's just virtual, that should be at least the first week of school. Having a conversation with the student and the parent in reference to what has been going on, you know, and so the parents can know how to talk to their children about it. The children can have a better understanding about what's going on. I think that should be what happens first in our school year. But it's just a matter of communicating with our parents. And like I said, some parents will not be receptive to it. You know, some parents will be, but we just have to try to reach out, whether it be email, phone call, whatever. Just have to reach out to them.
Thank you so much. Wow, I really enjoyed this discussion. Even though I talk to the three of you all the time, this was just a total different perspective. I hope our attendees of our teachers and directors enjoyed this. This is recorded, so we will be able to pick parts of it up for them to later review. I guess I just want closing remarks that any of you have for our teachers and directors moving forward. No particular order. You could just talk if you want.
And I just want to say, I so appreciate you providing this forum. I think that these are such essential conversations for all of us to have. And I think a lot of us would not have had this conversation had you not provided this setting. And I think that's a great example for what schools and teachers can do for parents in their communities. And my final statement would be, please don't give up on them. right? This is a process of learning and scaffolding. So if your first approach doesn't quite work or doesn't go over the way that you thought, gather it all up, talk to somebody you know who's also committed to this process, and try again, try in a different way. We would never teach a child to read, and then if they didn't read the first day, be like, well, I guess it's not happening. Guess they're just not going to read. Like, that would be ridiculous. And so I think with these conversations, we need to have that same approach is, okay, we need to try it in a different way next time.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I would like to thank Dionne for inviting me again. And I definitely got great information from each and every one of you in reference to our children. And I would love to somehow do this again. And maybe, before that happens, we can each gather more information that can help us with our kids. But thank you again.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks, Dionne, for setting this up. Really appreciate being able to be here. Just a couple thoughts that I had right before we go. I was thinking about how we want to keep having these conversations, and I think Toni might have said it earlier. Like, we have to communicate. No relationship works without communication. Literally, like no relationship.
Sure.
And I think that in terms of our teachers and getting them prepared to, work through these challenging times and work through these challenging topics, I think in higher ed institutions, we might need to, do a little bit of work on the curriculum. Listen, if I got to take 2 semesters of French, I think somebody should make it mandatory that we do 2 semesters of, race, diversity, and inclusion. Hands down. I think that's just, we're doing our teachers a disservice, and they may be ill prepared when these kind of things come across their desk. So, and then one more thing I would just say is there's an article out that I recently read. It's called 10 Ways to Fight Hate. I would highly recommend it. It's really practical information that parents can read, teachers can read, providers, just really simple information on how we can really start to move towards more equity and inclusion.
Yes. So again, thank you, everyone. I want to say this was a collaborative effort. We were trying to find the best venue to address some of the needs of our teachers and directors. And panel discussion just seemed to pop in my brain, and our team just took it, and we're here. And like I said, hopefully we can continue this. I want everybody to just breathe and take everything in, this lovely discussion we had, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. And hopefully I shall see you soon.